Pharmaceutical plant loses its master validation engineer. The FDA doesn't send a sympathy card. They send Form 48-3s. I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a Waffle House off I-78 in New Jersey, drinking bad coffee out of a paper cup, watching the morning shift workers pull into the lot at Meridian Biosynth across the street. I'd driven past that plant almost every day for 19 years. I knew which door stuck in the rain. I knew which validator on the night shift always forgot to log the temperature excursions before 8 a.m. I knew where every ghost in that building lived. I just didn't work there anymore. My name's not important for this part of the story. What's important is that I spent 2 decades as the lead process validation engineer at Meridian Biosynth, a mid-size pharmaceutical contract manufacturer in Bridgewater, New Jersey. We made APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, for about a dozen drug companies. Nothing glamorous, no cure for cancer. Mostly blood pressure medications, anticoagulants, a couple of biosimilars we'd added in the last 5 years. The kind of drugs that keep 70-year-olds alive and out of the hospital. The kind of drugs that, if something goes wrong in manufacturing, people notice. My job was to make sure nothing went wrong. More specifically, my job was to prove, on paper, with data, with signatures, with protocols and reports that could survive an FDA inspection, that every process we use produced the same result every single time. Validation. It sounds bureaucratic. It is bureaucratic. It is also the reason your blood pressure pill contains exactly the right amount of active ingredient and not twice as much. I built Meridian's validation program from the ground up. When I started, the company was running on binders, whiteboards, and the institutional memory of 3 guys who'd been there since the 90s. By the time I left, we had a 47,000-page validation master plan, a deviation management system I'd designed myself, and a track record of passing every FDA inspection clean for 11 years straight. That last part matters. Hold on to it. The new VP of Operations came in from a consulting firm in Boston. His name was Austin. I'll call him that because that's what his office nameplate said, and because I think names like that deserve to be attached to the decisions that follow them. Austin was 34 years old. He had an MBA from Tuck and a LinkedIn profile with the phrase "Change Catalyst" in the summary section. He wore the kind of slim-fit dress shirts that don't belong in a manufacturing facility, and he smelled like something from a department store. He was the CEO's son-in-law. That's the part that should have told me everything. It told me nothing because I was busy. I was always busy. In pharmaceutical manufacturing, busy is the default state. There's always a protocol to write, a batch record to review, a deviation to close out. I didn't pay much attention to Austin until Austin started paying attention to me. His first week, he did a walkthrough of operations. I showed him around the validation suite, walked him through the equipment qualification binders, explained the difference between IQ, OQ, and PQ, installation qualification, operational qualification, performance qualification, the 3 legs of the stool. He nodded along. He wrote things in a Moleskine notebook. I thought he was engaged. Later I realized he was writing down line items, not concepts. 2 months after Austin arrived, I got a calendar invite for a meeting titled Operational Efficiency Review. I didn't think much of it. We had those meetings regularly. I brought my laptop. There were 6 people in the room. Austin, the CFO, 2 people from HR, my direct supervisor, who had the good grace to look at the ceiling the whole time, and a woman from corporate I'd never met. Austin opened a slide deck. The first slide said, in large blue letters, "Reducing fixed cost infrastructure while maintaining regulatory standards." I learned that day that the phrase "maintaining regulatory standards" in a PowerPoint deck means approximately nothing. The proposal was to eliminate the validation department as a standalone function and redistribute the responsibilities across existing quality and manufacturing staff. The cost savings, approximately $340,000 annually. My salary was the largest line item. There was a pie chart. I looked at the pie chart for a long time. The industry is moving toward integrated quality models, Austin said. He said it the way people say things they read in an article on an airplane. Dedicated validation functions are increasingly seen as redundant overhead in lean manufacturing environments. I said, "Can I ask a question?" He said, "Sure." I said, "Who's going to maintain the validation master plan?" He said the quality team would absorb that responsibility. I said, "The quality team is 4 people and 2 of them are contract employees. They're already running at 110% capacity. Also, the validation master plan is 47,000 pages and it references approximately 2,300 individual SOPs, equipment records, and batch history documents. It took me 6 years to build, and it requires continuous maintenance every time we change a process, add a piece of equipment, or get a supplier change notification. Who specifically is going to do that? Austin said they had a plan for knowledge transfer. I said, "What's the timeline on the knowledge transfer?" He said 6 weeks. The woman from corporate wrote something down. My supervisor was still looking at the ceiling. I looked at the CFO, who was looking at Austin, who was looking at Houston, who was looking at his slide deck. 6 weeks. 19 years. 6 weeks. I said, "Okay." I capped my pen. I put it in my shirt pocket. Are we done here? I didn't make a scene. I've seen people make scenes, and it never helps them, and it never changes anything. What I did was go home that evening and sit at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and write down everything I knew. Not as sabotage. I want to be clear about that. I wrote it down because I genuinely believed that if I documented things carefully enough, whoever came after me would have a fighting chance. I wrote transition notes. I wrote explanations. I wrote warnings, clearly labeled as warnings, about which processes were the most fragile, which equipment had quirks that weren't in the official records, which regulatory timelines were coming up in the next 18 months. I wrote 83 pages of notes in 3 weeks. Then I submitted my resignation, effective in 30 days, as my contract required. No drama. No all-hands email about being undervalued. No Glassdoor review. I cleaned out my office, shook hands with the people I respected, and drove out of the Meridian Biosynth parking lot for the last time on a Thursday afternoon in March. My son called me that night. He was a junior at Rutgers. He said, "Dad, what happened?" "Mom said you quit." I said, "I didn't quit. I resigned." He said, "What's the difference?" I said, "One of them's a choice." He said, "What about tuition?" I said, "I've been putting money away since you were 9. You're fine. Go study." I want to tell you what the next 8 months looked like, because this is the part people skip over in these stories, and it matters. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't a montage. I applied for positions at 3 companies in the tri-state area. 2 of them were interested. One of them made me an offer at a biotech startup in Parsippany, about 12 miles from my house. The salary was 11% less than what I'd been making. I took it. You take what's offered when you're 52 and the industry knows your name, but not necessarily your face. My wife, Carol. She never complained. Not once. She went back to her part-time work at the dental office full-time. We didn't talk about it much. That's the thing about a marriage that's lasted 26 years. You don't have to narrate every hard thing to each other. You just move through it. I went to work. I built a new validation program at the new company. Smaller, simpler, but built right. I slept fine. I told myself that was enough. The call came on a Tuesday in November. It was from a man named Raymond, who I'd worked with briefly about 10 years earlier. He was a regulatory consultant who operated out of Philadelphia. We'd stayed in touch the way people in this industry do, occasional emails, a conference handshake every year or 2. He said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to not react immediately." I said, "That's a concerning way to start a conversation, Raymond." He said, "Meridian Biosynth is in trouble." I already knew some of it. Word travels in pharma. I knew there had been an FDA inspection in August. I knew it hadn't gone well. I didn't know the details. Raymond told me the details. Here's what happened after I left. The 6-week knowledge transfer produced approximately 12 binders of notes, most of which describe the same processes at a surface level without the underlying rationale. The quality team absorbed the validation responsibilities on paper. In practice, it fell primarily to one quality associate named Patricia, who was talented and hardworking and 27 years old and had been in the industry for 3 years. Patricia did her best. She was not set up to succeed. In June, Meridian received a supplier change notification from a key raw material vendor. This is a routine event. It requires, under FDA regulations, a specific evaluation process, a comparability assessment, potentially a new validation study if the change could affect product quality. I had written the SOP for handling supplier change notifications. I had written the addendum to the SOP that covered biosimilar products specifically because the rules are different for biologics and the standard guidance doesn't cover them adequately. The addendum was in the validation master plan. Patricia didn't know the addendum existed. Nobody told her because nobody else knew it existed either. The supplier change was processed under the standard SOP. The addendum was not applied. In July, Meridian began manufacturing batches of one of the biosimilar products under the new supplier's raw material. 11 batches over 6 weeks. In August, the FDA walked in for a scheduled inspection. I want you to understand what an FDA inspection feels like inside a pharmaceutical plant. It is controlled terror. A team of investigators shows up, sometimes 2 people, sometimes 6, and they have the authority to look at anything, any batch record, any deviation, any validation report, any equipment log. They can talk to any employee. They can request any document, and they don't tell you in advance which thread they're going to pull. They pulled the biosimilar thread. By the end of day 2, the lead investigator had found the supplier change. By the end of day 3, she had found the addendum I wrote in 2019, still in the validation master plan, still accurate, still exactly describing what should have been done, and she had confirmed it was not followed. 11 batches. Affected product. Potential patient safety issue. The inspection resulted in a Form 4083 with 7 observations. 2 of them were critical. The lead observation referenced the supplier change failure directly and cited inadequate validation oversight as the root cause. The company issued a voluntary recall of the affected batches, 11 batches of biosimilar product recalled. The cost of the recall: $4.2 million in direct costs. Product destruction, customer notifications, replacement manufacturing. Then the FDA issued a warning letter. A warning letter is not a fine. It's worse. It is a public document posted on the FDA's website stating that a company has significant violations of federal manufacturing regulations. It signals to every pharmaceutical company that contracts with you, this manufacturer is not reliable. It triggers an audit cascade. Every single customer comes in to do their own assessment. It can freeze new business entirely. Meridian had been in the middle of contract negotiations with a Massachusetts biotech company for a new manufacturing agreement. The deal was worth an estimated $310 million over 5 years. It was the biggest contract in Meridian's history. The warning letter was issued in October. The Massachusetts biotech called within 48 hours. The deal was dead. Raymond told me all of this on the phone, piece by piece, and I sat at my kitchen table and didn't say anything for a long time. Then I said, "How bad is it?" He said, "They're in remediation. They brought in a consulting firm. The consulting firm doesn't have anyone who knows their validation history." I said, "Is anyone asking about me?" There was a pause. He said, "Patricia asked about you. She's the one who found your addendum. She apparently told the quality director that she'd never been briefed on it and didn't know you'd written it." I didn't say anything. He said, "The CAO reached out to me last week, off the record. He asked if I knew how to contact you." I said, "His son-in-law still there?" Another pause. "Austin left in September," Raymond said. "Took a position at a PE firm in Boston." Of course he did. That's how it works. Austin had moved on to the next engagement, the next slide deck, the next pie chart with someone else's salary as the largest line item. He would never connect the dots between the decision he made and the disaster that followed. Or if he did, he wouldn't say so. I said, "Tell the CEO I'll call him Thursday. I want to be honest about what I felt in the days between that Tuesday and Thursday." I didn't feel triumphant. I know that's what you're expecting, and I understand why. It's a cleaner story that way. But what I actually felt was tired, and something close to sad, and a low-grade anger that I recognized as old. The anger wasn't new. It had been there since March, living in the back of my chest like a coal that never quite went out. It wasn't revenge I wanted. I'd spent enough years in regulated industries to understand that nobody wins when a company fails a FDA inspection. Patients are affected. Supply chains are disrupted. The employees who stayed, Patricia, the line workers, the night shift validators who were just trying to do their jobs, they're the ones who lived through the chaos. What I wanted was for it to have not happened. That's a want without a remedy. So I called the CEO on Thursday. His name was Gerald. I'd met him 3 or 4 times over the years at company events. He was in his early 60s, a chemical engineer by training, had built the company over 20 years from a small contract lab. He was not a bad man. He had made a bad decision, or more precisely, he had allowed someone else to make a bad decision, which in leadership amounts to the same thing. He answered on the first ring. He said, "Thank you for calling." I said, "Tell me where you are." He spent 20 minutes walking me through the situation, the warning letter, the recall, the lost contract, the consulting firm that was on-site and struggling. He was methodical and honest and didn't try to spin anything. I respected that. Then he said, "I'd like to bring you back." I said, "I have a job." He said, "I know. I'm not asking you to leave it. I'm asking if you'd consider coming in as a consultant." Remediation support. FDA response. "We need someone who knows the validation history of this facility at a level nobody else does." I said, "What's the scope?" He laid it out. 6 months minimum, on-site 3 days a week, leading the remediation team, rewriting the affected protocols, representing the company in the FDA correspondence, rebuilding the supplier change management process. I said, "What's the rate?" He named a number. I said, "That's not enough." He said, "What would be enough?" I named a number. It was approximately double what I had been making as a full-time employee. There was a silence on the line. Then he said, "That's fair." I started the following Monday. Patricia met me at the front desk. She was young and looked like she hadn't slept in 2 months, which she probably hadn't. She shook my hand and said, "I found your addendum in September. I've been reading everything you wrote." I said, "The addendum was in Section 14C of the Validation Master Plan. It was referenced in the SOP for biological products but not flagged in the General Supplier Change Procedure." She said, "I know that now." I said, "It wasn't your fault." She looked at me for a moment. She said, "It feels like it was." I said, "You were given a binder and told to figure it out. That's not a knowledge transfer. That's a liability transfer. There's a difference." She didn't say anything, but something in her face changed slightly, the way a muscle unclenches. The remediation took 7 months, not 6. We rebuilt the validation master plan from the sections affected by the recall outward. We rewrote 47 SOPs. We conducted a full retrospective analysis of every batch manufactured after my departure, looking for other gaps. We found 2 more minor issues, not critical but real, and we disclosed them proactively to the FDA before they found them. That disclosure matters. It doesn't erase the problem, but it signals that the company is operating in good faith, and the FDA tracks that. The FDA response was submitted in December. The agency acknowledged receipt in January. The formal resolution, a voluntary action indicated classification on the reinspection, came in April. That's the quiet ending to a loud disaster. No ceremony, just a letter in the mail that says, in regulatory language, that you fixed what you broke. Patricia is now the Director of Validation at Meridian. The CEO promoted her in February. She called to tell me, not to ask my opinion, just to tell me. I appreciated that. She's building the program the right way now. She hired 2 additional engineers. She has a backup for every critical process. She built the searchable index of every supplemental document I ever wrote, so that nothing lives in a single person's memory again. That last part was her idea, not mine. She's going to be better at this than I was. Gerald and I had lunch in April, the week after the reinspection cleared, a diner in Bridgewater not far from the plant. He ordered a Reuben. I had coffee and scrambled eggs. He said, "I should have pushed back harder." I said, "You should have." He said, "Austin had a compelling case on paper." I said, "Paper doesn't run batch records, Gerald." He looked at his Reuben for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. He said, "I've been in this industry for 35 years. I knew better. I think I just wanted to believe the problem was smaller than it was." That's the most honest thing anyone in management ever said to me. I didn't know what to do with it, so I drank my coffee. He said, "Are you happy at the new place?" I said, "I'm building something there." "Yeah." He said, "Good." My son called me the night the reinspection cleared. He's in his first year of grad school now. Biomedical engineering, Penn State. He said, "Dad, I heard Meridian got clean from FDA. Were you part of that?" I said, "I was part of the cleanup, yeah." He said, "They fired you, then paid you to fix what broke after they fired you." I said, "Consulted, not hired back." He said, "That's insane." I said, "That's pharmaceutical manufacturing." He laughed. Then he said, "Are you okay with how it ended?" I thought about that for a minute. About Gerald and his Reuben. About Patricia building her searchable index. About the 11 batches of recalled product that never should have happened. About the $310 million contract that was gone and wasn't coming back, and the $4.2 million in recall costs, and the employees who worked nights during the remediation without complaint. About Austin in his slim-fit shirt, starting fresh somewhere else with someone else's pie chart. I said, I'm okay with how it ended. He said, that's very zen of you, Dad. I said, go study. I'm fine. I'm still at the Parsippany startup. We got our first FDA inspection last spring, unannounced, which is always the kind that tests you. We passed clean, not because we were lucky, because every process we run has documentation that could survive scrutiny. Because I hired 2 junior engineers and made sure they understood not just what to do, but why. Because there's no single point of failure in anything we built. The man who knows why the reactor was designed that way will always have a job. That's not a threat. It's just physics. It's also, if you need it to be, a warning. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually went wrong at Peridian. And I don't mean the supplier change notification or the missed addendum or the 11 recalled batches. Those were symptoms. What went wrong happened long before any of that, in a conference room with a pie chart and a man who confused the cost of a person with the value of what that person carried. That's the thing nobody puts in a slide deck. You can calculate a salary. You cannot calculate what leaves the building when the person collecting that salary walks out the door for the last time. It's not arrogance to say that I'm not special. Patricia proved that. She built something better than what I left behind, once she had the foundation to build on. The knowledge itself isn't the rare thing. The rare thing is the time it takes to accumulate it, and the patience to write it down, and the discipline to maintain it when nobody's watching and nothing's on fire yet. Austin didn't understand that. I don't think he was a bad person exactly. I think he was a person who had been rewarded his entire career for identifying what looked like waste and eliminating it, and nobody had ever made him stay long enough to see what happened next. That's a particular kind of blind spot that gets manufactured in certain business environments, and it produces a certain kind of confident, well-dressed damage. Gerald understood it, eventually. The Reuben lunch, the honesty about knowing better and choosing not to push back, that took something. It didn't undo anything, but it was real. I've worked in this industry long enough to know that real accountability from someone in a corner office is rarer than a clean FDA inspection on a first attempt. And I don't say that lightly. What I keep coming back to is Patricia, 27 years old, handed a set of binders and told to figure it out, spending 2 months not sleeping while she tried to hold together a system she hadn't been taught to understand. When she told me it felt like her fault, I meant what I said. That wasn't failure on her part. That was a transfer of liability dressed up as a knowledge transfer. But here's what I didn't say out loud, because it wasn't the right moment. The fact that she found the addendum, that she read everything, that she told the truth about what she didn't know instead of covering it, that's the whole thing right there. That's the quality that actually keeps patients safe and companies solvent. Not the MBA, not the pie chart. The person who, under pressure, in the middle of a disaster, tells the truth about what she doesn't know and goes looking for the answer anyway. I think about the decisions we make when we're tired or pressed, or trying to keep someone above us happy. I think about Gerald in that conference room, knowing the problem was real and choosing to believe it was smaller than it was. I've done versions of that too in smaller ways, at smaller stakes. We all have. The question isn't whether you'll ever take the easier read on a hard situation. The question is whether you build your systems, your work, your habits, the way you document things and develop people, so that when you do, the damage is contained. I stayed in this industry because I believe the work matters. Not abstractly, concretely. The batches we validate end up in someone's medicine cabinet, in someone's IV line. That's not a metaphor. It's a supply chain. And somewhere at the beginning of it is a person like me, or Patricia, or the night shift associate who logs the temperature excursion at 7:58 a.m. because they know it matters, even when nobody's checking. That's worth doing right. That's worth building right. And if someone with a Moleskine notebook and a slim-fit shirt ever tells you otherwise, write down everything you know, all 83 pages of it, not out of spite, out of respect for what the work actually is.